Hello, and welcome to The Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Canadian Story. I'm very pleased to have Derek Fildebrandt here. He's a friend of mine for, I guess, about 5 years now. We've been friends, Derek, or?
Has it 5 years too
long? When did we meet? I don't remember when we met, but it was a long time ago.
Approximately 5, 6, or 7.
No, we met at Shamir's birthday party, and I think it was actually...
We didn't really know each other, but...
but that's when we met, yeah.
And
Shamir,
we worked on. I wonder if Shamir listens to this. I haven't talked to that little guy in a long time.
He listens to all of the podcasts and has he has great things to say about you always. So.
Oh, great! I love him. I'm not positive, but no, he was in. I got into youth politics with him when I was in university.
Right. Yes.
But he was too old for it, but he was still there.
So Derek Fildebrandt is a known quantity in his own right. But we'll go quickly through his resume. He spent some time in elected politics as a member of the Wildrose. Before that, he was with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Now he is running the largest independent media organization in Western Canada, outside in Canada, the largest.
Well, not by revenue yet, but by readership, I think we're almost certainly the largest at this point.
And one of the things that I love about what he's doing is he's decided to bring a reasonable voice to people that outside of that group, people don't see the group that he's representing as reasonable. We've talked about that a bit on the podcast, how Eastern Canada and Central Canada don't really understand the grievances of the West. And I thought that Derek Fildebrandt, of all people, would be the perfect person to bring on this podcast to discuss that. So we'll be discussing that.
Airing of the grievances is my favorite part.
Exactly. Yes, we're going to call this the airing of the grievances. And I think...
It's west of us.
It's west of us. I love that. That's golden. Okay, so
I think you might have a new title for the podcast.
Yes, exactly. West of us. So what we're trying to do here, as you know, is do something that might be a little bit counter to what a lot of your readership feels, which is love Canada, and to build kind of a new kind of citizen who believes in doing better for their country and loving the people in it. And I'm not saying that would obviously be totally aligned with your values. The difference is you don't really like Canada, but I'm still going to ask
that's not true.
Okay, well, there you go. I want to know, because I don't think a lot of people believe that you would, but I want to know, what do you love about Canada?
Well, I will answer that, but first, myself and I would believe a large portion of our readership, we love Canada. We just despise the Canadian federal institutions. I love the Canadian nation.
Oh, I love that.
There we go. I love the Canadian people. I love the Canadian. I love Canadian culture, for however bizarrely we define that. I love Canada, but I despise our federal institutions, which treat us as a colony, and I don't think can be fixed. And I know we'll get into that. I know I'm presupposing here, but I don't want to be labeled a Canada hater. I am not one. I love Canada. I was born a Canadian and wish to die one if it's possible to fix the thing.
This is what I want to hear. See, Zach, when I first mentioned this, Zach, and you could speak to this, as an Ontarian, you didn't even realize Albertans were angry or that angry, right?
It's very ignorant of me, I have learned, but I had no idea. I knew that Quebec had grievances, but this is embarrassing to say, but it was really only last week that it even came into my frame of knowledge that Alberta had a problem.
So we're like Newman at Festivus. We're not even invited to air our grievances.
Okay, so normally on this podcast we don't talk about negative things, but because we believe in addressing things and we love Canada, when you love something, you often have to, and in this case, there's a problem, a deep problem, and we've talked.
Well, I didn't answer your question though.
Oh yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
I that's one thing I hate about politics is we're always told not to answer questions, and I did answer questions, which is not good practice in politics. Something I love about Canada, I love that our national cuisine is fries, cheese, and gravy. and a weird cheese at that, like a really weird,
like a rubbery cheese. A rubbery cheese.
I was in Cologne in Germany a couple years ago. It was late at night, and I love German food. When I'm over there, I eat German food. But I was talking with these people, and I somehow got onto poutine, and I was explaining to them, and they're looking at me like, "What are you talking about? That's bizarre, disgusting, disgusting." And so that was more of a French accent than a German. But they just didn't believe me, and I said, "Okay, hold on here." And I went over. There was in Germany. There's these little, there's little kebab stands everywhere in the middle of the street. But there was this one place is pommes, fries, or potato, literally. And I went over to him, and he had like a bunch of things. I said, "Look, I got a really weird order for you. I'll pay you whatever it takes to make it. I know it's not on the menu, but I want you to give me fries, cheese, and gravy." And he just refused. He's like, "Not in my country." And
wow.
he just wouldn't do it. And I was trying to impress these people by putting together this makeshift poutine. I know it wouldn't be curds, but I was going to do my best, find some mozzarella or cheddar or something crappy. But the extra thing I love about this is that our national dish is from the part of the country that is most associated with wanting to leave the country, and gets angry that we have culturally appropriated this as the national dish. So I think that there is so much Canadianism.
There's so much Canadian down into that one thing. I love that. We
need to write a book about poutine and how it defines the Canadian national character.
Yeah, done. Let's do it. Why not? We don't have anything better to do. No, I love that. That is a great answer. And I loved what you had to say. I love the Canadian people. I love our story. I love our culture. But there is a problem. There's a real problem here. And it is an existential problem. I think this is the problem that could destroy Canada if it isn't fixed. And I wish that people would give it a little bit more credibility than they do in Toronto and Montreal and Vancouver, where they're basically just dismiss Albertans as grumpy. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, geez, your own man here, Zach, does.
Yeah, well,
he doesn't dismiss us. He just doesn't know about it.
He doesn't even know.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that drives anger in, I'm going to use the West as a very broad term. And I kind of distinguish between the cultural West and the geographic West. Obviously, Vancouver Island is a part of the geographic West. There's no more West than that. But the cultural West, I would define as large parts of Manitoba, especially outside of the downtown of Winnipeg, extending all the way through interior BC, ending somewhere around Surrey. And then there are pockets of the cultural West on Vancouver Island. I'd argue even in Northern Ontario. I'd argue that the Ottawa Valley is in some ways.
The Ottawa Valley is more conservative than Alberta, I've often told people.
Yeah, exactly. So,
which is where you're from.
I am. And I was telling Zach before the show, he asked me why I came to Alberta. I said, well, I was a pilgrim in an unholy land, and I had to get to the Holy Land.
I love it. That's great. I know I appreciate you calling my home the Holy Land.
You have called me an Eastern bastard before. I said, look, I'm a former Eastern bastard that adopted the West, and you're a former Westerner who adopted becoming an Eastern bastard.
Well, to be fair, my family's from here too, as Zach can attest.
Not helping your case.
Okay, so airing of grievances. Why are Albertans upset? And I would like you to try to articulate this not in a way that the Westerners will understand, because they already know why they're upset. Yeah. Try to explain to Zach, someone who doesn't really know that much about politics. No offense to Zach, he knows a lot about music. What is it that is causing this consternation?
Well, I don't want to pick on Zach. I don't really know him, but
go for it.
You're going to be my whipping boy. So Zach, from the brief intro I've had with him, seems like an otherwise reasonable person who would be open to listening to our issues, but he's just not aware of them. And that is actually a big part of the problem is when we have an issue. So you might have to excuse the sound of barking dogs in the back, but when we have issues, even smaller issues, they're just not listened to, either intentionally by, you'd see, to use the term Laurentian elites, or just unintentionally because we're just not viewed as important enough. Quebec gets a pee under 20 of its mattresses, and the country loses its mind. I mean, they're like, oh my God, we got to keep Quebec happy. They are upset that they're not allowed to ban Muslims.
What can we do to fix this problem for you? Like that's basically what Ontario says to Quebec all the time.
It's Marsha. Like it's Quebec, Quebec, Quebec. Any grievance, no matter how small, we bend over backwards. They could bring in unconstitutional legislation to ban Muslims from public office, and we tiptoe around that because we don't want to offend them. Alberta says, we'd like to have jobs, and we're like, greedy bastards. So it's a sense that we're just simply not listened to because we're not important enough. We're no longer a tiny little province. We've paid our dues, both in terms of building us up into a pretty large province, 4 million people. By
almost
far,
5 at this point. Almost 5, isn't it?
Yeah. Eventually, I think we'll be number 3 at some point. But BC grows too, so it'll take a while to intersect with them. But and we certainly have paid our dues financially.
Oh yes.
Yeah. And that's a whole can of worms. But we're just not listened to. Albertans are not. Our issues are not ethno-religious, racial nationalism in the way that they are in Quebec. People say we're a different culture. And yes, we are in the sense the way Newfies are a different culture, but they're subsets of a larger culture. We're not radically different. We don't drink milk out of bags.
Yeah, which is disgusting. I can't believe Ontarians do that.
Milk bags. I mean, that just sounds gross. What are you doing? What are you doing with milk bags? That just sounds gross. And I grew up with it, and I didn't know any better. And I got out west. I'm like, God, that was uncivilized. So there's little things. There'll be couple little terms, but we're not radically different in a cultural way. We speak the same language. We eat mostly the same food, prairie oysters aside. We're not radically different, but cultural differences is sure. We might be a bit more entrepreneurial on aggregate. That's not to say everyone in Alberta is an entrepreneur and everyone in the East is a welfare bum. That would be wickedly overstating things and oversimplifying things. But on aggregate, we're more entrepreneurial. On aggregate, our political culture, we were settled large part in the South by Americans. So we have, rather than peace, order, and good government, we tend to value life, liberty, and property a bit more. So our difference in values are on a civic level. If there is an Alberta nationalism, I would define it as a civic nationalism. It's not an ethnic nationalism. It's not a linguistic or racial or religious nationalism. It's civic. It's a set of values, and those values are different, but they're not radically different. And we've generally believed for most of our history that these differences aren't irreconcilable if we would just have a piece of the cake and have a seat at the table. And more often than not, even when we have a prime minister at the table, federal institutions are such that he has to be bent to the will of this archaic federal system that's just not going to give us a fair shake.
And on that note, one of the things we try to do on the Canadian Story is talk about loving a place. And I would like to say that there are very few people in the world who love a place as much as Derek Fildebrandt loves Alberta. And I think that should be noted. He really loves his adopted home. And I think of all the immigrants that have come to Canada who love their home. And I wanted to apologize to you, Derek, for calling you an Eastern bastard, because I know how much you love Alberta. And that was an unkind thing to say.
I take a lot of insults on a daily basis, and none of them get under my skin except for that one.
I knew that. That's why I just dug the knife in.
You can call me, or I don't know what your policy is about swearing here, but you can call me.
No, you can swear, yeah.
Oh, you can call me an asshole. You can call me all sorts of things. You can call me a kraut. It's a derogatory term. You can call me all those things, but Eastern bastard's the only one that sticks under my craw because I know I used to be one.
I know it cuts to the core of who you are.
Oh, it cuts to the quick. But in terms of rabidly loving Alberta. It's not unique to me. As I said, I kind of considered myself a pilgrim to the Holy Land.
Mm-hmm.
And converts to Alberta, we're not just migrants to Alberta, we're converts. People come here
yes.
not just because it's nice and there's opportunity. We come here because, for the most part, because there's something special about it and we want to be a part of it. And so to continue the religious analogy, we have the fervor of the convert. The person who's born into a family that's been of a faith for many generations, they go to church, they go through the motions, they tithe, but they're not going to pick up a sword and go on crusade for it necessarily. So myself and many others, we come here and we have the fervor of the convert, and which is why so many of the most rabidly patriotic Albertans are people who were not born here but chose to come here.
Yes, exactly. And I just wanted to highlight that for people. To understand Alberta, you have to understand that Albertans are the most fiercely proud of their province outside of Quebec. And that is a distinction that is not often made. Ontarians don't love Ontario like Albertans love Alberta. It's just not the case.
Ontarians are a third of Canada.
Yeah.
I used to be one. I've never in my life heard someone describe themselves as an Ontarian, generally even to others, unless you're just saying, you might say, I'm from Ontario.
And this is part of the problem, right? They think they are Canada.
Well, they are Upper Canada. They are not incorrect. They are Canada.
Right.
They're Upper Canada. Quebec is Lower Canada. Quebec is just the slightly junior partner to Upper Canada. So Ontario, how often you're driving around Ontario, how many Ontario flags do you see? None. It's not a thing. People don't describe themselves as Ontarian. They'll say, I might be from Ontario, but you're more likely, people have a sense of Toronto. I'm a Torontonian. I'm an Ottawan, and that's always a weird one, but, people have a sense of civic pride in their cities, but Ontario is a geographic expression, and a political expression perhaps, but it's not really a strong identity. Internationally, Albertans will, sometimes they'll say I'm a Canadian, but they'll often say I'm an Albertan. Quebecers will do the same thing. But I've never heard anyone.
And Newfies do the same thing. British Columbians do the same thing. It's every other province except Ontario.
And bonus fact for some of your listeners who don't know that much about Alberta, our favorite province, it might be Saskatchewan outside of Alberta, but after Saskatchewan, it's no doubt Newfoundland, because half the Newfies are living over here.
Yeah, they're all up in Fort Mac.
And they are some of the most rabid Alberta patriots.
And they're also some of the hardest working people you'll ever meet up there on the rigs.
Absolutely. I mean, we stole a lot of the best of them. They came here. Yeah. These are people who were not content to collect pogie and be on the government dole. These are people who wanted the pride and dignity of work, and they were willing to move to a frozen northern semi-tundra.
Essentially. Yeah, exactly.
I'm not gonna call them that, but it's not an easy place to be.
I can speak to that. I can speak to that for the listeners who want to know how cold Fort McMurray is. I was doing a show there one time at an arena, and the band who played before us, as soon as our show was done, started loading out. And so this is the dead of January, and they popped the big bay door at the back of the arena open, and it was minus 45 degrees, and in 30 seconds, every cable on the stage was frozen, and you couldn't.
Wow.
It's that cold.
Yes, it gets very cold in Alberta, and even colder in northern Alberta.
And remember, part of the Eastern stereotype of, when Alberta shouldn't complain for paying so much money into Canada. It's easy to make this money. The money's just coming out of the ground. No, this is not Saudi Arabia where you stick a hose in the ground and black money pops out. People are working in incredible sub-zero temperatures in very difficult conditions. They're away from their family for weeks or months at a time. It is not easy. These are not easy jobs. They're not just simple jobs that dumb people do. These are.
This is a really good point, because one of the things that is most often said is, why should someone graduating from high school get paid six figures? Can we dispel this myth, Derek?
Well, first of all, a lot of the people on the patch are not just rig pigs. They're engineers, they're geologists. There's highly trained, highly skilled jobs in there. But even the rig pigs, I don't know why we denigrate these people. They may have left high school and not gone on to post-secondary, but they're working their asses off. They are working in these terrible conditions, as I said, away from their families and their friends. They're living in what could charitably be described as a military camp at best. These are not
a military camp without the discipline of the military.
Indeed. So no, it is the greatest tool for social mobility until pretty recently. It's been the greatest social tool for social mobility in North America for people born into families without the opportunities to go to post-secondary education, without the opportunities that a lot of other people have. They can say, you know what, I'm from a family that doesn't have a lot of money, but if I can work hard. I have work ethic, and I'm willing to go up to the sands or into the field and work hard and make some money on it.
And a lot of these people over the generations that have worked up there have accumulated wealth and then sent their children to post-secondary education and introduced. They've created. This has created a way to get out of poverty for literally tens of thousands of Canadians and permanently get out of poverty.
Yeah, my very favorite people are what we call the rich rednecks here. Now, these are guys very often with just maybe a high school diploma. Maybe they did something else, but they started working in the patch. They started as just a rig hand and busting their nuts. And they've accumulated enough wealth. And you know what they did? They went out and they bought a single rig. They said,
one of my best friend, Brandon Swartz, who you know as well, one of my closest friends, that's exactly how he did it.
Exactly. And there are so many of them. Now, I wouldn't call Brandon a redneck, but he is the same.
He'd call himself one.
Well, he's a sophisticated redneck. But,
yes.
You go out to Brooks, you go out, Tabor and stuff, you're going to meet some people, and they look like an ordinary guy. They look like they probably just work on the rig. And they did start working on the rig. And so they're culturally blue-collar people, but they're often very rich. And they're not driving a souped-up, nice truck. They might have an F-350 if they're splurging. But these are not people who wear their wealth wear their wealth openly and opulently.
Because wealth isn't what they respect. Wealth isn't what they respect. They respect hard work.
Yeah, and so these people culturally, we all judge a book on its cover. I mean, you're going to see a homeless guy, you're going to make certain assumptions. You see a guy in a Monopoly hat riding in a limo, you're going to make certain assumptions. Well, these guys, you're going to make certain assumptions about them, and you're wrong.
Yeah, I love that. That is really good. Okay, so let's go to some of the key grievances. We've talked about this on a kind of philosophic, bird's eye view. Let's get down into the nitty-gritty of it. What are the institutional problems that are driving this? I would say it's the level of rage.
Well, it depends if we're talking the disease or the symptom.
Disease. I want the disease. Okay.
Well, I'll start with, for an example, with a symptom, and we'll work to a disease. The most prominent symptom is equalization. We're taking massive amounts of money out of Alberta and, to a lesser extent, BC and Saskatchewan, and pumping it into the rest of the country, half of which is going to prop up Quebec. It's a bizarre formula that does not even at all come realistically capture disparities in wealth between provinces. Quebec's got all sorts of exemptions on hydro and things like that. And in return, we get no respect. If you're paying, if you're giving allowance to your greedy kids, you want them to at least say thank you, Papa, and show up for Christmas.
Right.
But we're kicking over a net $20 billion a year, sometimes more. But right now it's about net $20 billion, even while we're in really bad times. And we get blocked. We can't build a pipeline. We can't do any of this stuff. So it's a lack of respect for contributions. And it's turned increasingly, I think, when we first started talking about an equalization referendum, that was actually Brian Jean and I, Jason Kenney picked it up from there. we first started talking about it, it was like, we want respect. We're not going to necessarily, we want some tinkering to equalization. I've been writing about equalization reform long before I got into politics. I was working in the Ottawa office of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. I was literally the only person in that city talking about this. But it was about reform, how to convert it into a more equitable program that would not disincentivize provinces improving their economies. It got nowhere. Even with a Calgarian as prime minister, it got nowhere. I don't think that's sufficient anymore. I mean, if we pass this equalization referendum in Alberta, I don't think Albertans will be satisfied unless it's just gone, 100% gone. Tinkering around the edges of it are not going to satisfy people anymore because it's a lack of respect. Now, that is the disease.
No, wait. So just on that point, before we move on to the next one, because I've heard the argument being out here a lot. Well, they're just bitching and moaning because they're still the highest per capita in the entire country by a long shot. Their unemployment isn't that bad compared to New Brunswick or wherever, right? So why are we complaining if we still have it so good? Now, can you address that? Because I think that is an argument that is holding water with a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm a libertarian. I don't believe anyone has a claim on the wealth of anyone else. No one has a right to someone else's money.
Thank you.
Yeah. You do not have a right to welfare. If you're going to get welfare, it is because the government has taken it forcefully.
It's the generosity of your fellow citizens. Welfare is the generosity of your fellow citizens, not your right. Yes.
Exactly. Now, most people, both for and against equalization, don't actually know how it works. And so it's really hard to have a debate on it. Neither side really has for the most part, the broad public on either side don't have a good idea of how it actually works. But I won't get into that. That's a whole other thing. No one has a claim on anyone else's wealth. And if you're going to take someone's wealth, you should at least be grateful for it and be a good neighbor. If my neighbor is in trouble and he's in financial trouble and I give him a loan, I expect him to at least mow his lawn, like
right.
Like, a little courtesy. If I come to ask him, hey, can I just borrow a little salt? I expect him not to yell at me and scream at me to get off of his lawn.
Right.
I'm not going to give you a loan, or in this case, we're not even loaning, we're just giving cash. I'm not going to just give you cash to help you pay your mortgage if you're going to scream at me to get off your lawn when I ask you to mow it.
This is a great analogy.
Oh, thank you.
So this is the symptom. What's the disease?
It's the structure of the federation. And so, America's got its own set of problems, but one of their problems is not fairness within the Federation, the American Federation. So just give a really high-level history lesson here. After the American Revolution, the 13 colonies sat down and they tried to figure out how they're going to design their country. And they broadly decided, well, we're going to have a president with executive powers, and we'll have a legislature with legislative powers. That'll be pretty simple. Okay. But then there was disagreement between the big new states and the little new states about are they going to have just equal seats between all of the states? Because they're all equal independent states coming into a federation. Shouldn't they all just be equal? Well, the big guys said no. I mean, Virginia, New York, Massachusetts, they would have many times the population of Rhode Island. So they said, no, it should be representation by population. They came to a compromise, and it was the House of Representatives was by population and strictly by population, and the Senate would just be equal to senators for every state. And they had the two houses of Congress had effectively equal powers with a few little variations here and there. Canada, by contrast,
basically that for the listener, that means on a practical level that each state has an equal voice in the decisions governing the country. Now,
yes and no, because there is still the House of Representatives.
Well, yeah, but what I mean by an equal voice in a chamber, that is a check on legislation. So if there's legislation that goes after Rhode Island has the same strength as New York.
Yes, and they built that same formula into the Electoral College. At the same time, they also knew that, hey, this country is obviously going to expand. We're just 13 little colonies here, and there's 4/5 of the continent still to conquer. So they set out a formula in their constitution for new states to join. First, you become a territory, And as soon as you apply for statehood, you are treated the exact same as every other state. Your House of Representative seats are based on population, and they go up and down depending on that. And your Senate seats are just the same as anybody who's been there. Massachusetts, where the beginning of the revolution was, you have the same number of senators as them. And it was a fairness applied no matter how old the state was or new the state was, no matter how big or small it was. They had equality. Canada, by contrast, I mean, what defines Canadians most, I think, our political character is compromise. Yeah, and sometimes that's good. Sometimes that's good. I mean, we tend to avoid extremes in one direction or another.
We haven't had any civil wars, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good thing.
We've had some rebellions. We've had some rebellions, but
mostly about crushing Westerners. But yes.
Yes. Yep. And
that should say something right there. The only rebellions we've really had since Confederation have been in the West.
Yes.
And they're admittedly pretty piss poor at doing it, though. But
at least they tried, right, Derek? At least they tried.
Yeah, it didn't get very far. But Canada's fundamental political character is defined by compromise. And that is good in the sense it avoids radical swings in one direction or another. But it is negative in the sense that it stops us from establishing any kind of firm principles and civic consensus that we can all get behind. So Confederation was essentially Sir John A. Macdonald loaded up a yacht with vodka and champagne. They sailed to Prince Edward Island. He got the leaders of the different then British North American colonies piss-roaring drunk. And they didn't establish a broad parameter for, okay, this is what the country is going to be. Here will be the division of powers. And here's the same rules for everybody. They said, okay, Ontario's going to get this. Quebec's going to get that. The different maritime provinces get these things. And it was a back of the napkin deal. And it was easier probably to get a back of the napkin deal, but it has long-term consequences. And those consequences are still felt to this day. So Canada essentially has two tiers of provinces. Provinces that were already quasi-independent British North American colonies. And those, because they were already self-governing to some measure, they were able to negotiate that deal on the back of a napkin coming into Canada. That's Ontario. It is every single province in Canada except for Alberta, Saskatchewan, and sort of, but not really, Manitoba. Alberta and Saskatchewan were just a part of Rupert's Land and then the Northwest Territories. There was never an elected assembly here that said, okay, well, we want to be a province, so let's talk and agree on what those terms and conditions are going to be. It was Ottawa said, here's what it's going to be. The locals there want to be one big province called Buffalo. Too bad. We don't want a big rival.
We don't want competition. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want a big power base in the West that'll rival the central Canadian provinces. They dictated how many seats we got. They dictated if we owned our resources or not, and the answer to that was no. And that was for a long time. It eventually changed in the 30s, I think. Ottawa got to dictate the terms. They just simply created us on a map without any negotiations. And, as a result, we now have...
Without any consultation.
Exactly. It was, I think that's exactly right. So, one example that really is one of the most, I think, visible examples would be the Senate. The Senate has, I think, 24, 25 seats for Ontario, 24, 25 for Quebec, and then a hodgepodge all around that was just kind of negotiated all over from there. Alberta has, if I'm not mistaken, about 4 times the population of all 4 Atlantic provinces combined, including Newfoundland and Labrador. 4 times the population of all of them. Yet we have just about half the seats of only New Brunswick, or half the seats of only Nova Scotia. There are different models for upper legislative chambers around the world for different federations.
But this is literally the worst upper chamber in the entire world.
I'm sure in North Korea, they might have some Politburo with an upper chamber somewhere. I'm not going to say we're worse than that, but we're in the running. And, the United States and Australia have equal numbers of senators. In Germany, another relatively decentralized-ish federation, their Bundesrat is like the American Senate or the Australian Senate, but it's not exactly equal. They have kind of a sliding scale. So smaller states in Germany have more senators, or the term's really not translatable. Technically, it means gentleman or noble, but not really translatable. So like Saarland, it's like 200,000 people. That's their Prince Edward Island. It doesn't have the same number of seats as Nordrhein-Westfalen, their biggest state, but it has more senators per capita than their biggest state. And so it's a sliding scale of about 5 different classes. And that gives more voice to the smaller guys, but not equal to the very biggest. There's a lot of different models for upper houses in the democratic world where we have federations. And Canada's is by far the worst. And
it's not even close. It's like comparing apples to oranges. They're not even the same thing.
I would say our Senate has probably more in common with whatever the hell North Korea has than the United States or Germany or Australia. Because guess what? Like everything in North Korea, ours isn't elected.
No, just straight up appointed. We just say, the Prime Minister just says, and that body has traditionally not as much power from a common law perspective, but has just as much power on a legal perspective as the elected.
Well, don't you know that they're all independent and based on merit right now?
Well, actually, we're going to be having, and I just wanted to let you know this, we're going to be having a senator on here who I highly respect, but he was appointed by Stephen Harper, who could not agree with you more on this particular point, I think, and actually he was so principled on this point that he hurt the conservative movement by not appointing any senators anymore because he was so tired of it.
Yeah. Well, and I'm going to say something kind of might surprise you here. I actually don't think we should have an elected Senate right now, because you're just going to give a democratic legitimacy to a body whose seat count makes no sense.
Yes.
So as long as the seat count is so bizarre, I don't want any democratic legitimacy in the Senate. Not that I want Justin Trudeau appointing my senators either, but say we just said, okay, all of Canada is now going to elect senators. It's going to be democratic in the electoral sense. It's not democratic in any federal or even demographic sense. So Alberta has always been, for at least our modern history, underrepresented in the House of Commons. We don't have as many seats as our population grants should allow us, because parts of the Constitution, mostly involving the Maritimes and Prince Edward Island, make that impossible. But then we don't even have equality in the Senate. In fact, we have insanely less than our population in the Senate. We are by far the most underrepresented. So I say this is not the only thing that's wrong. I actually think this is a great example of, like you said, the disease, because the disease is that there are a lot of just obvious problems that any half intelligent person living in Alberta looks at it. They're like, this is just unjust. This is not fair. Yeah. And, what was really disheartening was, we had an Albertan, we had a Calgarian, Stephen Harper. He was a reformer. I stopped voting for him for 2 reasons. One is, I think in his last campaign, he didn't really campaign on doing anything. He said, I'm not Justin Trudeau. And I said, well, I like that you're not Justin Trudeau, but I want to know what you're going to do. He didn't really campaign on anything. It was just, I'm competent, he's an idiot. And I agree, but that's not enough.
That's not a good enough reason.
No. And the other thing was, I was let down, not because I think, Stephen Harper, I don't think was lying to anybody. I don't think he had the hopes of the West. When I remember the night that he won his first election in January 2006, and he said, the West is in. And I wasn't even a Westerner yet. And my heart lifted. Yeah, I was already Westerner in spirit at the time, but not by postal code.
Right.
And my heart lifted. I was from even though we were from the Ottawa Valley, we were Reform Party supporters. We got the West, but we were a small minority. And, we had 2 minorities and 1 majority of Stephen Harper. And, during the minorities, I'd be disappointed in so many things. And conservatives would always tell me, wait till we have a majority, we're going to fix things. And nothing got fixed. Equalization, not fixed. The current formula that we have today was written by Stephen Harper with Jason Kenney around the cabinet table. That's what we have today. The Senate, Harper tried, but Supreme Court blocked him. He couldn't get any reforms done. He couldn't get broad electoral reform. He didn't even bother trying to fix the seats because that requires constitutional reform. And so, it dawned on me that even our guy cannot change Canada. This kind of comes back to what I said at the beginning. I love Canada. I love its people. I love our culture, but our institutions are broken. And the big moment for me, and this came later, this came in, I don't know, somewhere while I was still in politics, about halfway through, it dawned on me that I don't think Canada can be fixed. To change the Constitution, which is what's required, simply electing people with the blue jersey on because they're our team, quote unquote, is not going to do it. It just means we're less pissed off because they don't openly insult us.
Yeah, the way I've heard it described it by someone, actually Peter Menzies, who was big in the Calgary Herald, is he said Albertans were happy about Stephen Harper because the beatings stopped. So it's basically if you're in an abusive marriage, which is essentially what Alberta's in right now with Canada, if they stop hitting you, you'll feel better. But that doesn't mean you're not in an abusive marriage anymore.
Yeah, I think that's a great analogy. We were respected, and it was our team, but not really very much changed. Like nothing fundamental changed. And to change the Canadian Constitution is difficult. Constitutions should be difficult to change. But the problem is the amending formula.
Broken. This one's broken.
Yeah, the amending formula is broken because we're already disadvantaged. We can't fix these things because Canada was not founded on an equal basis between provinces the way the United States was. Again, they've got their own set of problems. I'm not holding them up as a great example, but they got this part right, that all states are treated equally and they have a triple E Senate.
Yes.
And we got this wrong fundamentally at the beginning. And we tried the reform. We tried Brian Mulroney. He was going to fix it for the West. He screwed the West. We tried the Reform Party. They tried, but they realized, hey, you can't form a government with just the West. So we gave up that, brought the conservative, the modern Conservative Party into being. And the compromises that are necessary to achieve national power mean that there's nothing left of that reform agenda other than respect for the West. That is all that is left from that reform agenda. And so for Westerners to win power nationally, they have to be a part of this big, broad tent conservative coalition. But for that coalition to win, they can't campaign on doing any of the things really that the West needs them to do, which is why I don't think Canada can realistically be fixed by anybody.
Okay, but if it could, and here would be my suggestion of how it could be. I think regular, everyday Canadians in Ontario, like Zach, and there are many, 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 many of them like Zach, who don't even know that Alberta's angry. But that word needs to be spread, and Ontarians need to realize that if they want to remain Canadians, at least in the way that means something right now, they have to fix this problem. It's on them to fix it.
Yeah, but this has been tried. Like we had Brian Mulroney, we had the Reform Party, we had our own party that was adamantly Western. They did, and they changed positions on different things throughout time. But the one thing Reform Party never gave up was fairness in the federation. That was keystone, and that got watered down a little bit in the Alliance, but it was still mostly there. But by the time it became the Conservative Party, even though we had a Calgarian there who almost certainly wanted to do these things and would do everything in his power to achieve these things, he got nowhere.
Okay,
he got absolutely nowhere.
And that's a good point.
And so we've been raising these issues with the East. But since before I was born.
This will be my point, Derek. This will be my point. If you are, let's say, an abusive spouse who doesn't realize that you're abusing your spouse for whatever reason, maybe you're not self-aware, maybe you're an alcoholic, maybe you have addiction problems, which is, I think, a really good analogy for what's happening. Alberta's being abused. Eventually, if your partner has any dignity, they're going to leave you because they're like, I can't continue to take this level of abuse. And the only way that you could save, you may never be able to save it because the relationship has been tarnished. You can never recover from that. And that's kind of where you're saying we're at. I think Ontarians need to wake up to that. It's not going to be the Quebecois. It has to be Ontarians.
Well, like if you're in an abusive relationship, you might still love the partner. I mean, that's why they continue. we still love the partner, but we can't even get their attention that there's a problem here. And that's when you have to threaten to leave the marriage.
Yes.
The problem is I don't believe in threatening unless you actually intend to do it. Which is kind of full circle around to why I'm a conditional federalist or a conditional sovereigntist. I believe that the best case scenario is for Alberta to remain in Canada if Canada can be fixed. I don't believe it can be, which is why I'm a sovereignist. But I don't think that is the best case scenario either, which is why I felt that what Alberta needs to do is put all our grievances into a package, a nice, neat constitutional package, and say, honey, before I leave you, I'm giving you a chance. Here is what I need to be happy in this relationship. Here are the things we need to do in this country.
You need to take out the garbage. You need to clean the dishes, like whatever it is.
Oh, no. We'll still take out the garbage and clean the dishes. We just want you to say thank you.
Right, yeah.
We just want a little appreciation.
Yes.
So, before Albertans vote on something like independence, I think we should have a first referendum on here's the conditions that we need to be met to stay. Nothing special. We don't want special treatment like Quebec. We don't want special status. We just want to be able to keep more of our wealth. We want fair representation in the House of Commons. We want equal representation or something resembling it in the Senate. We want greater protections for provincial jurisdiction.
Yeah, we want to be in charge of our guns. Like we don't want, like Ottawa should
often
get
leave
to
me my
decide.
guns.
Yes.
Yeah. Like if you want to if Quebec wants to take people's guns away, I think that's unfortunate, but that's their business, whatever. But stay out of our business. So we have to put forward what are our conditions, and they should be reasonable. They shouldn't be unreasonable from us. We should have a referendum on that, and we should be clear that if that referendum passes within a certain period of time, a reasonable period, but not too long, if Ottawa and the other provinces don't come to the table to address our needs to save this relationship, well, then there's going to be a second referendum, and we don't want to hold it, but we have no choice. So I know a lot of people are like, they look at the polling right now and they see that maybe an independence referendum wouldn't win. And my statement to those people is, this is an abusive relationship, and Albertans are starting to wake up to that. And if any even halfway competent politician was to truly champion this cause, they would win it. Yeah. Look, Quebec independence support was pretty much in the single digits before, what's his nuts?
Levesque, right? Was it
René Levesque?
Yeah.
And it was in the 30s before Lucien Bouchard. These things go up and down. Right now, we commissioned Main Street to do a poll. 25% of Albertans would vote tomorrow to leave, and 36% of Albertans would vote to form a broader new Western Confederation. Now, that is without a single elected official in the Alberta legislature sitting in an independence party. There's Drew Barnes, who sits in the Conservatives for now. And but there is no clear leader to it. We have no bloc. We do have the Wildrose Independence Party, which is ticking up in the polls, but it's still not broken through yet. It has no permanent leader. You give us a René Levesque, you give us a Lucien Bouchard, and we're easily over 50, especially if, you have, I really give a lot of grief to some of the hardline sovereignists in Alberta who say, well, let's just have a vote tomorrow and get it. Well, you're going to lose.
Yeah, and then you're going to look really stupid.
Yeah, but let's say you had a sovereignist party form government in Alberta, and they presented a reasonable set of demands for constitutional reform, and the rest of Canada told us to pound sand. Well, I think, like the failure of the Meech Lake Accord to even further appease Quebec, that will have an effect like wildfire. So,
I agree.
And so this is the bizarre scenario we're in, where it is more plausible for Alberta to achieve independent nationhood than to tinker with seat counts in the Senate.
Yeah,
that should say something about how broken this country is.
That's how absurd it is. It's easier to leave. Well, I just love the analogy of an abused spouse, because that's where we're at. Unfortunately, we didn't get to talk about everything we wanted to because we have another podcast coming up. But this was great. I want to have you on again to talk about this. I'd love to actually do a regular show.
I think we had two other big topics we're supposed to get to. And
I know. We got to get to our next guest. The other topic,
we'll do it another time.
Exactly. But thank you so much for coming on here, Derek. I've always admired you, especially how you bounce back from any difficulty. That's something to behold, and I think that says a lot about your entrepreneurial spirit. I'm very impressed by what you've done with the Western Standard. You're not becoming another rebel. You're a credible media organization that is doing serious work, but from a right-wing perspective, which is something we've been sorely lacking in this country for a long time, and nothing has been able to achieve it up until you came along. So I think you deserve accolades and respect for that, and I hope that you also get a lot more funding. Anyone listening to this who wants to invest in real right-wing news, not the garbage that Ezra Levant panders as a merchant of rage, you should contact Derek Fildebrandt, because despite his reputation, he's a very reasonable guy, and I think everyone who listened to this is going to get a better perspective of why he understands these concepts on a deep, deep level. And hopefully, if you're from another part of Canada, you can realize what's at stake here.
Well, I don't know about reasonable, but I think rational.
There we go. I like that. I like that. Well, thanks a lot, Derek.
Thanks so much for having me on the program. I'm a big fan of what you've launched here. I've got high hopes for the Canadian Story podcast. And hey, if someone needs to tell the rest of the country what the hell's going on here. So I really
exactly. That's why I wanted to have you on, because I don't think people understand.
Yeah. Well, my pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Cheers.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at The CAD Story. That's The CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.